Let's go through the what is it called? Expand your universe, control your universe. What's the homework we're doing called?
Expand your universe.
Yeah, Universe Explorer.
Yeah.
Universe Explorer. So let's look at implementing what it would be like. Here I am. To implement Universe Explorer. So the universe I want to create is something that tracks cohorts and students. You might be tracking Marvel Universe characters and their superpowers. I don't know what, right? The requirements are something that you're a fan of, that you're doing, that has at least 2 tables that are related, right? Kind of like in the Star Wars API, we had characters and ships, or characters and planets, or planets and species, right? We need at least 2 related things for this Universe Explorer. So I think I want to create something that keeps track of cohorts and students. So I'm going to start by making my ERD. I found this random free drawing tool so I can draw. You don't have to use this. I do not endorse it. I don't like it. It's not good. It's random. Please do not write down this website and use it. I literally spent 3 seconds looking for something so that I can draw not on a whiteboard and draw on the video record, because I know you all love having the video. This is not a good tool. I do not know it. I'm only using it because I see you all immediately like, oh my God, an ERD tool. I do not endorse, do not use. Maybe we'll find out it's good, maybe we'll find out it's crap. I don't know. I just want something where I can draw on the screen. So I think the very first thing that we have is we have cohorts. What are the things about a cohort I want to keep track of? Maybe the name of the cohort. Maybe I want to keep track of the start date of the cohort. Maybe the end date of the cohort. See, it already sucks because I can't add a 4th row. See, it already sucks.
Oh.
The end date of the cohort. What else of the cohort? Maybe. Yeah, so schedule is a multi thing.
Right.
So name, start date. No. Let's say if it's a paid cohort or it's a free cohort. Boolean. This is a date. This is a. I'm not going to do too many things because I don't want to go crazy. And I also want to be able to finish this in an hour. So maybe these are the things we're going to track about a cohort. A cohort will have these things. So the other thing that I want to keep track of is student. So student will have a name. Maybe they'll have an address. That's a string. Name is a string. And let's say that this is age, yeah. And email, string.
I wonder the pet, isn't it different depends on the individuals? So it cannot be.
Well, sometimes we have a cohort where we don't charge students.
Okay.
Right, like the cohort that we did for Proforma paid for it.
Yeah, okay.
So, right, in turn for you going to work there. So cohort and student, right? And we know that a cohort, do I have lines here? Cohort and student are related. Oh, that really sucks. Yeah, don't use this tool, it sucks. Right. So cohort and students are related, and a student will belong to a cohort, and a cohort will have many students. So that means that a student, oh, this really stinks, will have a cohort ID. It'll be an integer. So this might be my data model for this thing that I'm going to make. Cohorts and students These are the things that it has. I probably would have gotten this from a design if I was going through and doing the HTML and the CSS first, right? I would have identified that I have cohorts, and cohorts have these things, and I would have identified students, and students have these things by looking at the HTML that I had. That's probably how I would have gotten this list if I were doing this as like a capstone. Right? I'm skipping the HTML and CSS part and just generating this. So now I'm ready to start making my app. So let's go into SDG unit 3 and week 9. Let's make a new app and let's call it SDG. All right, so I'm just gonna make a new app. I'm gonna call it SDG. It's an API app only, right? So our standard Rails, new, Skip Spring, database, Postgres, API. Do not try and keep up with me because I'm gonna go really fast.
Yeah.
Because I got an hour and I want to implement the entire thing. So you're not gonna be able to keep up with my typing. So I'm gonna go faster than I normally go in lecture typing. I explain everything I'm doing, but I'm gonna type faster. So if you wanna follow along, you can watch the video later and slow down. Oh, why am I installing Nokogiri? It must have been a new version. I already had Nokogiri.
What is Nokogiri?
It is an XML processor that Rails requires. Unfortunately, it takes forever to install. So there's gonna be something a little different about this. We now have two tables together where there is a belongs to relationship, right? Students belongs to cohorts and cohorts belong to students.
That's one of many relationship.
One to many, yeah. One cohort has many students. Many students belong to one cohort. Student has one cohort. Oh, come on. That's weird because we just made a Rails app.
And the many to many's is the ones that requires a foreign key.
It requires a middle table.
Middle table.
Yeah. So this cohort ID is a foreign key to the cohort.
Okay.
And when we generate the scaffolds for these, you'll see how that is. Oh my goodness. Come on. I really wish this Nokogiri with native extensions didn't exist, because it always takes forever to install. There we go. Okay, so let's Rails DB create, because we've got that to do. First time we make a Rails app, we've got to create our database. Cool. Let's git init. Oh, we don't have to git init. Let's git add dot and git commit, initial commit, so we can see our work. So that's all the Rails stuff, right? So we're going to commit the Rails stuff just as the initial commit, so we can see the work that we do on top. Because if I wait and I do a commit with Rails and my stuff, they all kind of bleed together. So let's start creating some scaffolds for our model. It doesn't make much sense to create the scaffold for the student, because as you can see, the student depends on the cohort, right? The student has the cohort integer reference this way, so it makes more sense to start with the cohort, right? Cohort's kind of the top level of this, so we're going to start at the top and work our way down. So let's generate a scaffold for a cohort.
Is that a good rule of thumb to start from the largest and
Start with when you draw your ERD, it'll kind of probably look like a pyramid or maybe like a spider web. Usually start at the thing at the top or the center and work your way out. And you'll see why in a second.
Okay, cool.
So let's create this cohort with a name that's a string, a start date, that's a date, an end date, that's a date, and paid, that's a Boolean. Cool. So here's our scaffold. Let's go take a look at the migration that's created to make sure it looks right. DB migrate. So cohorts, string name, date start date, date end date, Boolean paid. Looks good. Did we get a model? Yes. Did we get a controller? Yes. This all looks good. So let's Rails DB migrate to generate the cohorts. Cool. I'm going to commit this. Okay, so all we've done so far is made a new Rails app, scaffolded a cohort. This is very similar to what we've already done. In fact, if I run the Rails server and I created a couple of cohorts, you would see all the same things we've done, like for the animal safari adventure. Same kind of thing. Right? We would be able to go into Postman, and we would be able to connect and create some. We would be able to create some cohorts because we have routes for a cohort, right? Cohort, index, create, show, update, and destroy, right? Familiar stuff. Just like animals in the Safari, we have cohorts. So I should be able to, yes, fine, new, no, go away, close. I should be able to create a new host, HTTP local host 3000 cohorts. I should be able to say raw JSON and make a request for a cohort name cohort 13 start date. I forgot what your start date was.
January 28th.
And your end date, which is soon approaching.
For 19th.
Yeah, let's just say that. Cool. So if I submit this, there you are. Okay. If I get the list of cohorts, there you are.
Can we put data for paid? Paid? Can we put data for paid?
Yes.
2 or
So let's make another cohort. Let's make a cohort, let's say charity, let's create a pro forma. I don't know, I started sometime in 2018. Let's make a random, I started on the 7th and it ended on the 10th. And paid is false.
is it true?
Right? Paid is false. Right? Whatever it is, false, true.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. So we know we can create some cohorts and we can see some cohorts. We should be able to show some cohorts. Right? Cohort /2 will be the proforma cohort because it's ID 2. And cohorts 1 is cohort 13 because it's ID 1. All of our routes work. Now, let's create the related table. Let's scaffold student. Rails generate scaffold student. Name is a string. Address is a string. Age is an integer. Email is a string. Now we have this cohort ID. Now I could type in cohort ID integer, but Rails gives me a special way of specifying a relationship when I'm scaffolding or I'm generating a model. I can say cohort belongs to. This says to the scaffold that a student belongs to a cohort. This will automatically set up a cohort ID, and you'll see when I generate the student model, I will automatically get student belongs to cohort. So when you have a model here, a student belongs to a cohort, even when we are scaffolding, we can say this scaffold student, it has a name and an address and an age and an email, and oh, by the way, it belongs to a cohort. you'll see that when we generate this scaffold and we go look at the migration that this creates, you'll notice, aha, name, address, age, email belongs to cohort, foreign key true. And if we go look at the model for student, oh, look at that. It typed belongs to cohort automatically for us. So when you're generating your scaffolds, if you already know the relationship between this model and another model, you can put it right in, and Rails will automatically start to learn that relationship. This is why we do our diagrams before we start scaffolding. If we get all of our diagrams and we make sure that all of our relationships look good on paper, when we go to make the scaffold, Rails will automatically start to set these relationships up for us automatically. So if student belongs to cohort, what do you think the relationship between cohort and student is? What do we know from this diagram? If student belongs to cohort, then cohort
Has a student ID?
No.
Or
No. So if student belongs to cohort, then cohort blank students.
includes.
Nope.
Belongs to.
Nope. How would you say it in English? A cohort
Has students.
has many students.
Oh, yes.
Right. So the one thing that Rails does not do with this is, I wish it did, that it automatically adds the belongs to for student, but does not automatically add has many students. I wish it would do the opposite relationship, but unfortunately it doesn't. So we have to add the has many side of the belongs to. Right? A cohort has many students. Students. Right? Cohort has many students, and our cohort here has many students. Let's take a look at our routes. There we go. Just wanted a nicer format. So you notice now we have two sets of routes. One for students and one for cohorts.
What is TS stand for?
I just was looking for two letters that I could search for that would exclude all the crap at the bottom, all of the active storage things. Right, when I looked at this, Rails routes, see how adding all this stuff at the bottom funks up the format? So I noticed that TS is in cohorts and TS is in students, and it's not in this. So if I search for TS, I get a nice clean Rails output. Otherwise, what I have to do is this, which is what I would normally do, is shrink down my font. This is what I would normally do, but I feel sometimes this font is too small for you to see what's going on, right? Because I would have to say, here's cohorts and here's students. So I'm just trying to get rid of this extra stuff that Rails adds for us. So this is cool. We have routes for students. But do students exist outside of the idea of a cohort? No.
Earlier on the target there, you put TS, right?
Yeah, ignore that.
Ah, okay.
That's me trying to be, I want to have a clean output,
Yeah, but how come cohort to show up?
because of course has TS in it. Cohorts,
Okay.
students,
Yeah, I
TS.
saw the
But
prefix.
there's no TS in any of this. So searching for TS excludes all of these and gives me a nice small table. I'm just trying to exclude this stuff. That's why I'm doing the search. So we said that cohorts has many students and students belong to cohorts. So it would be nice if my routes understood that I could ask a specific cohort for its students, right? All I have a way is doing of getting all of the students. What we probably want is just to know for a given cohort, what are those students? So when we have this relationship, cohorts and students, we can nest the resources. We can say, in order for us to have students, we first must say, what cohort are you talking about? and what are the students in that cohort. And it's called nested resources. The documentation for it is in the guides. Guide. In the guides, you look in nested resources. Right? It's common to have resources that are logically children of other resources. For example, suppose your application has magazine and ad. Right? Ads belongs to magazine, so they nest. Just like we have cohorts nest students. Students are inside of a cohort. So when we have that in our routes, right, see how it added 2 sets of routes? Resources, cohorts. The other thing we can do inside of this do end, right? We had this do end before where we were adding our own custom controller, collection and member routes. If we add a do end, we can sneak this resources students inside. So now students live inside of a cohort. We've nested them inside. Now when we generate routes, aha! Now if you notice here are the cohorts, but look at the difference in the student routes. They all start with cohort ID students. Now all of the student routes here are nested inside of a specific cohort. Right? In order for us to talk about a list of students, right? Give me a list of students. First you tell me which cohort are you talking about, and then you can say, I want all the students. We've nested this resource. You see how that's helpful? Right, I want to know who are all the students in cohort 13. I would say cohorts and the ID for this cohort, and then students. What I've lost is the ability to ask for all of the students, but maybe that's not a feature my API needs.
Could you just please go back to, so you had the resources where you had cohorts, it's like a class, students, application record belongs to cohort. Okay, so cohort has many students, student belongs to cohort.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Cohorts has many students, students belong to cohorts.
Great.
This is what we got by default for routes. Right, we just had students and cohorts, and then we said, hey, let's put students inside of cohorts. So now in order to ask for a list of students, we first have to tell it the cohort. Right? We eventually moved the students inside. So now our routes, in order to ask for students, we can't just say /students, we have to say cohort. Which cohort are you talking about? Students. Cohort 1 students, cohort 2's students. When we create a student, we have to tell it which cohort are you creating the student for. Mm-hmm. So I wish Rails were smarter about this. If I now look at my students controller, there's nothing in here that talks about cohorts. So unfortunately, I have to change all of the code in this controller to get it to understand cohorts. Nothing in here knows that students is nested inside of cohorts. So I, the programmer, have to come in and start to change this a little bit. So let's do that. Notice in the routes, we have a cohort ID. So for everything that talks about students, all of these, I also know about a cohort ID. So I don't want all of the students. Let's first load the cohort. So if we first load the cohort, right? We first load the cohort by finding the cohort with that cohort ID. Can I not say that cohort's .students? because I know a cohort has many students. So instead of student all, the students are the students in that cohort. All right? So now I've nested those students based on their cohort. Anastasia,
So
question?
it's almost like you're combining models?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep. I've taken those two models and kind of hooked them together.
Okay.
So now, anytime I talk about students, I have to say, which cohort do you mean? You mean cohort 1 students, or do you mean cohort 2 students? Right? Which means I have to change this code a little bit. Unfortunately, when you generate a scaffold, Rails doesn't know about nesting. So the scaffold only goes so far, and if you want nested resources, you, the programmer, have to come in and start changing the code. So that changes at students for this. For this one here, it just renders at student. The way that gets populated is this set student down here. So I don't want to find any student. I want to find first the cohorts Then I don't want to find any student. I want to say this cohort students find the ID. I've scoped. I don't want to find any student. I want to find the student has this ID within this cohort students. All right, find this cohort inside of this cohort students. So now that works for delete, and that works for show. But here, we're just making a new student. Let's do the same thing. Let's take the cohort and find the cohort based on its cohort ID. And instead of student new, this is at cohort.students new. What this will do is when I build this new student, it will automatically be associated to that cohort. First we find the cohort, go find cohort 2, go find cohort 100, go find cohort 975, and for that cohort's students, build a new one with the information the user gave us. That automatically ties that new student to the cohort you set. It automatically links those two models together. This cohort students build a new one. Now, every time I create a new student, it will automatically be in the cohort I want it to be in. And that should be it that I have to do now for nesting students inside of cohorts. So let's try and build a student. Right? Let's try and put a student in one of these each cohorts. Right? So now to create a new student, let's go back and look at our routes. Where's student create? It's right here. Right? It's /cohorts, cohort ID, students. So let's post HTTP localhost :3000 students cohort. Which cohort would we like to start with? Do we want to start with cohort 13 or, oops, sorry, where's the get? Get. Oh, I have cohorts 1. Let's load all the cohorts. Oop, and I have migrations pending because I never ran Rails DB migrate. See the error told me migrations are pending? I forgot to run Rails DB migrate. Rails will prevent you from running your code if you have migrations pending. So do we want to create a student for cohort 13 or cohort proforma?
You don't know about performance, so cohort 15, yeah.
Sure. So then what ID do I want to fill in here? 1. So let's put ID 1 here. Let's go body raw JSON. Then inside of here we put student. And what are the attributes of student? I never remember. So let's go to the schema. Students have name, address, age, email. Name, Gavin. Age, girlfriend says I act like I'm 12. My email is gavin@suncoast.io. And I don't have to fill in the cohort ID. Because where is it going to get the cohort ID from?
Yes.
Right up here. Right? I've already told it I'm talking about cohort 1 students. So because I put that cohort ID in here, and because when I go to create a student, I find that cohort first, and I say, this cohort's students new. Automatically linking those two models together. So it should, if we've done this correctly, when I create this student, what did I forget to do? JSON, raw, student name. It says unexpected token here. What did we forget to do? Let's see.
Comma.
Student. Oh, I'm missing a comma. Good eye.
Right.
Good eye. Nice.
Holy
Look
crap.
at you, debugger.
Ring that bell.
Go ring that
Ding,
bell.
ding.
Go.
I'll do it later.
Okay, but that wasn't the only thing we fouled up.
Oh, well.
Oh, I have an extra comma here. Oh, the comma that was missing there, I moved it down there. It migrated south for the winter.
That's funny. Now
Wait.
still. Param.
Oh, and I have a typo in here. This is params. Did I make that same mistake anywhere else? No.
No.
I didn't make it here. And I didn't make it there. Good. No typos. No typos.
Whoa.
No method.
Okay, so now we are still using, no, that's interesting. Students controller 26. Oh, so students controller. Now, notice that when we create, it says render JSON and it has this location. This location is where is this student. So this is trying to give back a URL of the student. Right? It's trying to say, where is this student's URL? So now every time we talk about a student and where it lives, its URL, we have to prefix it with the cohort. So we have to change this as well. The location of the URL for the newly created thing is first the cohort, then the student.
Why do you need
Sorry. Go for it.
Why do you need array?
Because I'm making a list. So what you don't tend to see, unless we can look at the headers. Let me see if I can. There we go. So look at the headers. Look at the location right here. It gave the URL where this student exists. And notice that it says cohorts 1, students 2. All right. So this is the location of where this cohort, where the student lives, such that if I put this into, I would get back.
Correct.
Why did it say cannot find a cohort, find an ID? Oh, because I have another typo here. Cohort ID. Too many cohorts and too many typos. There we go.
There.
Right? So what it's trying to do is tell me in the headers, where does that location live? It's part of what Rails automatically generates. And anytime we have this location, we have to say first the cohort, then the student, because student is nested inside of cohort.
Why wouldn't you just originally just throw the cohort there, since you already know student is nested inside of a cohort?
I forgot that this little bit of code was here.
Oh, but you would have had to just have that originally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I'm trying to show here is this is the change you have to make to a scaffolded controller
Yeah.
to make it nested. All these places here, here, here,
I wasn't there.
and here, and here. Those are the things you have to change in order to nest them. So now we have, right, cohort students. Now, if I say cohorts 1 students, this should give me a list of all the students that are in cohort 1. And look, I've got 2 Gavins, right, because I generated it twice. But if I say cohort 2 students, I have no students, right? Because cohort 2 is what? It's the pro forma cohort. We didn't put any students in that cohort. So now if I need to know who are the students in cohort 2, it's these. Who are the students in cohort 1? It's these, right? What are all of the yoga poses in this yoga class, right? What are all of the somethings in my patterns? What are all the events for this troop? What are all of the videos for this user? What are all of the jobs for this company, right? Most of you are going to have nested style resources. This is how we're going to create them, like so. Right. Do we have to nest them? We do not, right? But if your data is nested in that way, this is the most common way of seeing these APIs created. Right. So this is nested resources. Often when we have a one-to-many, the many is tucked inside of the one with nested resources like this. Right? We're nesting the students inside of the cohorts. This is pretty much all we have to do for the back end. Let's see if we can make a front end. Let's see how far we can get with making a front end. So that's app, gamma, an SDG front end. And I'll post both of these to GitHub. Why don't I add git status? Made a cohort. Oops, nope, not a cohort. So now let's go back and run our Rails server. Let's make a full UI with this, even with like React Router. It won't be pretty because I ain't got time to make it pretty, but we'll make it functional. We'll at least be able to list all of the cohorts, and we'll at least be able to see the students inside. And if we have time, we'll add, delete, and edit, and create. We'll see how much we can see. So I'm going to go ahead and add React Router and React Router DOM. I know I'm going to need those. Let's go ahead and add them. And then let's code dot and yarn start. Yes, 3001. So let's do the side-by-side thing so we can kind of see what's going on. So let's put this on the left. Let's put this on the right. Nope, wrong thing. That's the wrong browser. Where'd it go? Here it is. Nope, still the wrong thing. Nope, stop. Ah! We want to take this and put it on the side of code. There we go. This is what we want. So let's start by making a component. This is imagining I had already done my HTML and I had a page to list all the cohorts. I don't have that, so I'm going to start like I pretend like I had one. Let's create a list cohorts.js, and let's RCC a React component, and let's make this a UL. Whoa, two cursors typing in two places. So let's start with making like we had a mock-up of cohort XII. Let's make a whole bunch of cohorts. So this is like if I had my mocked up we had a cohort called the ocho. That was cohort 8.
Mhm.
Right, so here's my list cohorts. I'm not ready to do React Router just yet. So what I can do, and this is to answer your question from the other day, Tatiana, is what do I do if I don't want to dive into React Router right away? I can just import my list cohorts from list cohorts and just render that from my app. Cannot resolve list cohorts in source. Did I not create this? In... Oh, I put it in components. Yes. Cool. So when I make my next component, I'll just swap this out as I'm testing them, and then we'll wrap router around it. So here's our static data. The next thing we might do is make this from state. So now we have some state. Now I can get rid of this li, do this.state.cohorts map. Cohort becomes an li cohort right here. Let's do it the way that the data will be. So the data is going to be actually an object that has a name like this, because this will be more true to the API. You know what I'm going to do? Let's do this, because this is really a good way of doing this. Let's grab the list of cohorts right from the API. Let's just grab all of this, right? Remember this? You would go to like the API page and you would grab the JSON and just stick it right in here. So let's just do that. That's a better way of doing that. I like that better. Right, boom, there's some here are some cohorts. Right, now what I want to put inside of here is not the cohort, but the cohort name. Aha! So now we have some dynamic cohorts, but from static data. We're not hooked up to Axios yet. So that means now I can get rid of these hard-coded LIs, and now I have the dynamic data that if I created another entry up here, I would have more cohorts. Right? So now I've moved from static HTML to dynamic, but from static state. The last thing to do is now make this come dynamically from the API.
You can move this data to JSON.
I could also put this in a JSON file. Yep. If this becomes too messy, it could be in a JSON file. I like Axios, so let's yarn add Axios to our project. Just makes APIs easier to deal with.
So with just like a regular local JSON file, we use Axios or Fetch the same way with just the URL is just the file path, the local file path?
So if I was going to do this as a JSON file, what I would do is I would make a cohorts.json.
Okay.
And then I would take all of this here, and I would put it in the file.
Right.
I would get rid of the cohorts part like this. And then I would say import cohorts from cohorts.json. Then this could go away, and cohorts would be cohorts.
Cool.
Right? So that makes it a little cleaner. Now what I can say is component did mount Axios get. Well, what's my URL? Where did I steal that data from? Right from here. Right? And I can say, hey, get this from this API. Then the response should be this.setState cohorts is response.data. Okay, this is how we get data back from an API with Axios.
You just have to import.
Yes, thank you. Import Axios from Axios.
Where do we use backtick?
When we have the $sign interpolation inside. So this looks pretty standard, but now I don't need this cohorts JSON anymore. And I can have this start with an empty array. And I can get rid of my cohorts JSON. I don't need that little test file anymore. So let me get rid of that. Now I'm loading this data straight from the API. That's interesting. For some reason, it is not coming through as JSON. For some reason, it's making me want to put .json on the end. It's still not giving me back.
Where did you create your JSON file?
I didn't. I'm pulling it from the API now. I'm trying to get it from Axios. I'm getting nothing here.
Oh, well, the response.json. Is that part of
No,
it?
I don't have to do that because that's for fetch.
Oh, really? Because I've been doing it, so I guess, I mean, with Axios,
You shouldn't have to do the response JSON, the
Yeah,
double
I-
response.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Isn't it 3000?
It is localhost 3000.
You're
No,
3001
you're on
at the
301.
URL.
On the
Oh, we're just trying to see the front end of it.
Yeah, I'm trying to see the. I'm getting an error. Oh, cores. I forgot about cores.
No, the rat.
Right, remember the rat cores thing we've got to do because it's a Rails application. So back here in the Rails application, I have to uncomment this.
Oh, yeah.
I have to change this to a star.
Of course.
And then I have to disable this. The hoops you have to jump through. And then I have to bundle. And then I have to Rails server again. When it's time to do this for your capstone, I have a whole like detailed step-by-step guide on how to take a React app and a Rails app and put them together. We will probably walk through that on Thursday or Monday of next week. Literally, how do I make my React app and my Rails app one thing? And it's literally type this, do this, do this, do this. And I'll walk you straight through it. This should now, there we go. Here's our data. Cool. So now what we'd really like to be able to do is like click on one of these and go to that and see the students. So I really should make this a component, right? A component to show this cohort, right? So I can display the cohort itself. So let's do this. Let's make a new component for a cohort. Why is my complete not working?
Oh.
RCC, there it is, cohort. Now here, what we want is the LI, and we're going to show the cohort.name, but since we're going to pass it in, it's going to be this.props.cohort name. Then here in list cohorts, instead of an LI, we can say cohort, and we can make the cohort equal to the cohort. Cohort. But we also need a key, right? Because every time we use map and a component, we need a key. Now fortunately, we have a natural key, which is the ID. So now we have this as a component where we have the ID and we have the particular cohort that we're looking for. Okay?
Wasn't it cohort dash ID?
.id. Because if you look at the data that comes back, look at the data in the Axios response. Cohort.id, just like we have cohort.name, cohort.id. Because it's an object here. If we look at the network and we look, that's just console.log, it'll be easier for you to see. We look at the console. Here's that response data. .id, .name, .paid, .start date, cohort.id.
I think I just lost it. Key. I'm wondering, is like naming conventions. So you always put a key with the cohort ID, but if you wanted to use like props, and you wanted to just pass in the ID, you could just do this.props.key, or the convention be better to have like ID.
So the child cannot see the key. The key is for React.
Oh, okay.
Remember that error you got? Roll your brain back to week 3, and we said every time we use map, we have to provide a key inside.
Right.
So React knows which thing is which. You want to keep, as you're coding, you want to keep this console window error-free.
Right.
Anything that shows up in red here, stomp it out and kill it.
Okay.
If I don't put a key here,
Right. So I was just wondering.
I get this warning, everything should have a key.
I understand that. And I'm wondering, like, okay, if we, so in cohort, I wanted to just display the I somehow, I don't know, use the ID through, like, for the API call, like
Right.
what I was doing for the project. And
Yep. So let's go see that. So instead of passing the cohort, let's just pass the ID.
yeah, so it would be that. I mean, essentially, that's what I was trying
Right.
to figure out. Is
So now what happens is it's like, hey, I don't know cohort here. So now what we have to do is we have to fetch the cohort, right?
right.
So now in component did mount, we have to use this.props.id to fetch the cohort.
Right.
So that means that we're going to have a state because we're fetching something. And in the initial part, maybe this cohort is nothing. Like we don't know what the cohort is, right? Instead of this.props.cohort, this becomes this.state.cohort. So now, every time you want to display this cohort, we're going to go fetch it from the API, right? So here what we would do is we would do Axios get. And now I'm like, oh, how do I get a cohort? Let me look at my route. Where's the routes that get a cohort? How do I get a single cohort?
Just get it.
Ah, it's right here. It's get cohorts and the ID. So now we're back to Mira's question of when do we use backticks? We use them right here because now I want HTTP localhost 3000 cohorts this.props.id, then response this.setState. What are we setting? The cohort to response.data.
For props, do we need to put what?
No, because we changed it slightly. Because the question was,
In the $sign, the props.cohort?
No, it's- because here we put ID equals cohort ID. We have ID as cohort ID. So this should give us back the cohort being the response data, but we still have nothing. So let's, inside of here, console log response data.
Instead of set state props, no?
Oop, I have an error. Oh, did I stop the Rails server? I did. Nope, it's right here. So I'm getting an error. What am I getting error? Local
Do you
host.
need to change set state to prove? The set state.
Yeah.
Is it supposed to be props?
No,
No.
we can't change props. It says here name not resolved. Oh, localhost.
Oh, come on.
Local host. Oh,
I
come
saw
on.
that. We forgot.
There we go.
Localhost.
Localhost.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so now it's fetching these. Cool. So now we can look up a cohort by its ID with its props. Now this means that we can make this start to be a link and use router, right? Because the cohort now can look up the cohort based on its ID, right? So now what we can do is in the app, if we just have this be cohort ID equals 1, import cohort from components cohort. Aha! If I change this to 2, change this to 1, change this to 2, change this to 1, right? Which cohort I'm showing, I'm changing. So this is a cheap way to not have to worry about router until we're ready, right? Because I can just say, well, show me cohort 1. That's like, what happens if I click on cohort 1, right? If I'm developing all my components, I can say, well, which cohort do I want to show? And I can build out the entire cohort page, right? So maybe for here, we don't want to use an li. We want to use like a ul and show the cohort name, and we want to show, the start date and the end date. Right? So now if I change this to 2, right, I get different data. So I can start building out my cohort display page, right? And I can make sure that it works in the app even before I have anything that's clickable, right? There's a little bit of a problem, and then if I change this back to list cohorts, right, now I get like all the details on this page. So probably what we need is 2 different cohort components, one for listing cohorts and one for showing an entire detail cohorts, right? Because this cohort is used here and it's used to show all the details. So what sometimes happens is you end up with 2 different components, one when it's used in the list and one when you're showing the details. So likely what we should probably do is rename this. This should probably be cohort details. And then in the cohort, we just have a plain old cohort, and this is where we would send the entire cohort. Maybe we'll call this cohort list item. So this is something that happens quite often when you need to show a cohort, like something in a list, and then show a full detail. So here's our cohort list item, and this is where we would say, back to our old li, this.props.cohort name, just as an li. Right. So in our list cohorts, this would be a cohort list item. Now we have 2 different ways of showing a cohort.
Use that R in
Item. It was trying to tell me too, wasn't it?
the.
Oh, and somehow I missed my export.
So what is list item and what is detail?
So I made 2 different components. I made one component for when I'm just trying to show a cohort in a list. And I made another component when I'm trying to show a cohort details. We'll see why in a second. Here's why. So here I'm just trying to show a list of the cohorts, right? So this is my list cohorts component. This would correspond to the page in your app where you're saying list all the videos, list all of the yoga classes, list all of the patterns, list all of the troops, list all of the jobs. And what I want to show here is I want to get all of the cohorts and just show a little list item of the cohort. I don't want to show all the details of the cohort. I just want to show a cohort list item. So a cohort list item just renders the name of the cohort. But when I want to show the cohort details, I need to pass it the ID of the cohort I want to show. Right, and I want all the details of the cohort. So cohort details is going to show me the name and the start date and the end date and eventually the list of students. But the cohort list item, just all I want is the LI that goes along with it. All right. So, 5 minutes. I probably don't have time to add router. But what we would end up doing is we would end up importing router now, and the list item would get a link wrapped around it. Right? And the link to would be linked to cohorts, right? And this.props.cohorts ID, right? We would start to try and make some routes in our we would start to make some links in our front end, so we can start to click on things and navigate them. That would be the next thing we would do, is we would try to make in our list cohorts, we would make these clickable, so that when I clicked this, what I would see is this. Right, now if I click the other cohort, I want to see this. This is where now router comes in. Once you have your list page and your detail page, and you have both working and both actually fetching from your API dynamically, then we can set up router. So I try to push off the complications of routing as far away as I can in the process. I want to make each page work first, then I want to make them linkable. If you already have routing done, awesome. If you don't, just make your individual pages work and then worry about routing.
I was wondering about with the routing, so essentially just like what you were saying about the similarity between the front end route, the React router with the Ruby, is that essentially we're just telling, excuse me, we're telling which page to go to, like in the URL, I want to say schema, but that's not the right word. But essentially, it's just like
the structure of the URL.
Yeah, so you're going to see this component, and you're going to expect in your in the URL bar to, component name, ID. So,
yes.
So like that. And, okay, cool.
What I want to be able to do eventually is in my front end, be able to go to cohorts 1 and see the detail about cohort 1, and be able to go to cohorts 2 and see the detail about cohorts 2. That's eventually what I want my front end to be able to do. And what will happen is, in my cohort details, rather than get it from this.props.id, it's going to come from this.props.match.id. Like we did the router ID. We're going to start pulling the ID from here.
So the match.id is what really is important with the router. Okay, cool.
So we're kind of go back to when we did photo gallery, kind of how we did photo gallery. So it's going to be the list of all of the categories. This is like our list of cohorts.
Right.
And then when we click on a cohort, we're going to see the details of the cohort and all the students. Then we'll be able to click on a student and see the details of the student, right? Probably what we'll do is we'll just finish this tomorrow morning. Right? I will push this code up so you can look at it in the video. I know it goes very fast, right? So this would be a good one to play back slowly and try and reproduce, right? Or look at the code in GitHub and see how that goes, right? So we can figure out how to start breaking this down. This little mini Universe Explorer is like a small iteration of what your capstone is going to be like, right? Similar, we're going to do a similar process for capstone. So you can see why when you have all the HTML done, it makes this process easier, what I'm trying to do here. And when you have all that HTML done, it's pretty easy to create these diagrams of your ERD, right? And from that, we were able to make the scaffolds, structure it all, and my API is done for the most part. For this homework assignment, I probably don't have to go back to that API and do much work, right? I can create, read, update, and delete cohorts. I can create, read, update, and delete students. And that's kind of all I have to do from the perspective of an API, right? Now it's all tying in the user interface and the API and making sure it's structured correctly.
So backend is done, right?
For this assignment, for this what I'm doing here,
Yeah.
the backend is done, right? That was done in the first 30 minutes of what we were doing. Now I'm just using the API to build the interface, right? Because I spent the time to make my little diagram and know all my models, in this case only 2, you'll probably have more. But this is why when you have your HTML done, we can sit down and look at your ERD and make sure that we have everything. Make sure all the has and belongs tos and has manys are correct. So that when you sit down and start to create your scaffolds, clean sailing, right? The most complicated thing will be the nesting if you choose to nest, right? But that's just following a pattern too. So if you come to me and say, hey Gavin, I have all of my HTML done, let's work on my ERD, or here's my first attempt at the ERD, I can work through the ERD. We're just finishing.
Started, and then when you finish up,
Yep.
just come in Jason's office.
Okay, we're just finishing, right? So this is,
ERDs to look like that, or do you care?
if you just drew these on paper or in any kind of drawing tool, I'd be happy.
Okay,
I wouldn't suggest this one because it was not great.
yeah.
But if you like Visio, or even if you're just on a whiteboard and take a picture of it with
Okay.
your phone, awesome. Or have it on a piece of paper just drawn out.
And by Friday, you want those?
Yeah, it'd be good if we could review them on Friday.
Review, okay.
Yeah. So come on Friday and have your HTML that we can sit down and look at, and have your ERDs drawn, and we will go through all of your HTML and make sure your ERDs are great.
The right relationships
Yep.
and everything.
Because then next week, what would be great is if you started making your Rails app
Yeah.
and starts building your API. Because then what you can do is sit down and use Postman to start playing around with your API. Let me put in a whole bunch of troops and events. Let me put in a whole bunch of yoga poses. Let me put in a whole bunch of videos so we can see, is your data good?
Okay.
Then the next thing that would happen is after we make sure that's good, we start componentizing your front end exactly like we did here. HTML into React, React into dynamic data from state, replace that with the API, and you will literally see your app become alive as we step through that over the next 2 weeks, right? It's just a slower version of what I did really fast today.
Yeah.
Right, like the half an hour that I did of creating that scaffold, that's probably going to take you like a full day,
Yeah.
right? And then going through and componentizing things, that's probably going to take you like 2 days. And then, right, so everything for you will just be over a longer period of time. We just come check in with me as you go through these steps,
Yeah.
right? You checked in with me with the HTML, come check in with me on Friday with your ERD. We will make sure you're on the right path. When you're ready to go make your Rails app, come see me and be like, hey, Gavin, I'm about to run all of the scaffolds for my project. Let's look at the commands I'm going to run and see if they're right. Okay, let's look at your ERD. Let's look at your scaffold commands. Yep, those look good. Let's run them. Let's make everything nested. Move on. That'll be the process. Cool?